Welcome everyone to the Lessons Learned from State and County Food System Mapping Projects webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Caitlin Miziazik, and I am a program officer at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. I'm joined today with my colleague, Jamie Harding, who is a GIS specialist at the center. And together we work on a variety of food systems mapping projects, including managing the Maryland Food System Map Project. We will be facilitating this webinar with our amazing group of panelists who I will introduce in just a moment.
Thank you, Caitlin. This webinar is being hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, an interdisciplinary center located at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Our work focuses on the intersection of diet, environment, food production, and public health. The Food Policy Networks Project is one of our projects with the goal of building the capacity of food system stakeholders to reform local, state, regional, and tribal food systems through effective public policy. We do that through training, sharing best practices, networking with other food policy councils and leaders, and developing and providing food policy resource materials. If you aren't familiar with the Food Policy Networks Project, I encourage you to check out our website and to sign up for our listserv to hear about future webinars. After we introduce our panelists, each food system map project will give a brief introduction to their application, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion. Please enter any questions you might have along the way in the Q&A box. We will have space to answer them throughout and at the end of the webinar. And this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available in the next few days. Caitlin?
Thank you. So again, we are so thrilled to have an amazing panel with us today to share about their experiences and lessons learned creating food systems maps at both the state and county level. We're going to kick things off by reading the bios of our panelists, and then each panelist, as Jamie said, will give a brief introduction to their mapping project, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion. So let's begin with our panelists here. We have first up from Colorado, we'll have Becca Jablonski. She is an associate professor and a food systems extension economist in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at Colorado State University. Dr. Jablonski's research and extension program is comprised of two primary components: evaluating the farm and ranch profitability impacts of sales through non-commodity markets, and assessing the community economic impacts of food system policies, investments, and programs, including strategies focused on strengthening rural and urban linkages. As a part of her position, she co-leads CSU's Food Systems Initiative and the CSU Food Systems Extension team. Dr. Jablonski holds a PhD from Cornell University. Next from Ohio, we have Sean Quigley, who is a technologies program manager for the Knowledge Exchange. Sean received his BS in Sustainable Resource Management and later his certificate in the practice of data analytics from The Ohio State University. Sean has over 20 years of GIS, data management, and software development experience supporting large national water quality and public health studies at organizations such as the Great Lakes Environmental Center, the U.S. Geological Survey, and the Battelle Memorial Institute. He oversees the software and app development, data management and analysis, as well as geospatial work. Also with Ohio, we have Wajihah Baig. She is the GIS technology specialist for the Knowledge Exchange. She helps develop GIS solutions to support various researchers through the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Science. Wajihah received her BS in GIS from the Ohio State University, and before joining the Knowledge Exchange, she worked as the geospatial data analyst at the U.S. Department of National Transportation. And lastly, from New York, we have Melissa Keller. She's a planner with the Chautauqua County Department of Planning and Development. Since joining the department in 2019, Melissa has served as the liaison to the county's Planning Board and the county's Agriculture and Farmland Protection Board. She has also enjoyed working on the establishment of the Chautauqua County Food Policy Council and assisting with initiatives to bridge gaps within the food system. With her is Linnea Carlson. She oversees the operations of the Jamestown Public Market as the only full-time farmers market manager in Chautauqua County. Through her work, Linnea interacts with producers, schools, nutritional education leaders, and social services coordinators throughout the county. She has been a key player in the establishment of the Jamestown Mobile Market, as well as the Jamestown Community Compost Project. She seeks to advocate for positive changes between regulations and the food system. Linnea also serves as the chair of the Chautauqua County Food Policy Council. We thank all of you for being with us today. And to get started, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Jamie, and he'll start off our brief project introductions by speaking about the Maryland Food System Map.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'll share my screen and bring up Maryland Food System Map. Hopefully everybody can see that. The Center for Livable Future started mapping the food system in Maryland in 2009. So we've been doing this for quite a while now. It began with one person collecting data and making simple PDF maps. However, as more and more partner organizations began asking for data and maps, we decided to look into how we could make them available online. We wanted people to be able to explore the data we had collected, make some simple maps, and download the data so that they could do their own analyses. This led to us to work with a consultant to launch the first version of the Maryland Food System Map in 2012. With the map up and running, we were able to secure funding from a local foundation and grew our team from 2 people to 4 people and grew the number of data layers on the map from around 30 to around 150. After a few years, web technology changed and our application started to slow down, so we were forced to go back to the drawing board and develop a second version of the map, the one you see here on the screen. We currently have over 180 data layers on the map. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, we've divided them up into around 13 different categories. We cover all the main stages of the food system and then have additional categories of information such as health, demographics, and environmental indicators. About 85% of the data on the map comes from publicly available sources, such as state agency websites, and about 15% we compile ourselves. And it's the data we compile ourselves that are the most popular because they're not located anywhere else. So I'll just do a brief demo of the map application. I'll open up the food retail category and then click on farmers markets, which we just updated recently. And you can see them drawn on the map here. If you wanted to learn more about a particular site, you could click on one of those sites and a pop-up will come up with more information. You can also, if you create a map, click share and copy a link and people will get a direct link to the map that you've created, or you can export it as a PDF. And lastly, over here, you have an information button. If you click on that, you'll learn more information about the data layer. And then also you see this download button. So if you were to click that download button, you'd be taken to our open data portal, which you see here. And if you click on full details, you learn more information about that particular data layer that you've looked at on the map, including the data source and the data date. And if you click on download, you can see that you can download the data in multiple formats. One of the great things about this open data portal is that, excuse me for a second, you can search for archive data. So data that used to be on the map, but is not currently on the map, that's been updated. So let's say we wanted to search for farmers markets in the open data portal. You can actually see when you scroll down that there are multiple years worth of data on the open data portal. So in this case, it's 5 years worth of data. So I'll finish by saying that when we originally developed the Maryland Food System Map, we thought that researchers would be our main audience, but we know 9 years later that it's actually being used by a much wider audience, not just researchers, but advocacy groups, people who work at state and local government agencies, food policy councils, and community groups as well. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn things over to Becca.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jamie. And hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And in fact, I would say when we started this effort, if you had ever told me that we were going to be presenting a map with the Maryland Food Systems Map team, I wouldn't have believed it because they've just been such a great example for the rest of us. So I'm here on behalf of myself and my colleague, Rebecca Hill. She's been my partner in crime in helping to put together this map from the Colorado State University side of things. So the mapping journey in Colorado.
Could you make
Yes.
it full screen? We're seeing both the current screen and the next slide.
Oh, my apologize. My apologies. Hold on one second. Okay. Oh, okay. Give me one sec here. Tell me, did that do it? One more second. Apologies, everybody. Okay. Okay, how is that?
We see the application and not the slideshow.
I'm so sorry here. What about that? Is that still not, you're still not seeing it? I apologize, everybody, for this. Okay, well, I'm going to just go back to where I was because at least seeing, there we go. Is that good? All good?
Yeah, you can go with
Okay,
that. Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, we're just going with this. So anyway, the journey to Colorado's food systems map actually started in about 2016, and Nourish Colorado, that used to be Live Well Colorado, they at the time were helping to oversee the Governor's Food Systems Advisory Council, as well as a network of all of the local food policy councils in our state. And so it really came from, I think, the folks who are involved in these food policy councils and wanting to have a better sense of what the food environment looked like in each of those regions. And so at that time, Nourish invested in something called Community Commons. And we used Community Commons for a number of years. Community Commons is now based at the University of Missouri. But when we got some of our own funding from the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, we actually decided to build our own mapping tool. And I'm happy to answer more questions around this, but part of the reason was that we found that we were having to pay every time we wanted to add a new indicator or variable. And we really thought that it was better for us to control it ourselves. So the cool thing about this grant was that it brought together a number of different existing and emerging efforts in the state. So in addition to the food policy councils, there had been a number of work happening in the city and county of Denver, as well as around the rest of the state, and sort of planning around agriculture and food systems. And so we were able to integrate these different projects and to understand sort of the data that were being collected and emerging needs, and to think about how to integrate that into our mapping and reporting tool. So initially, the mapping and reporting tool was designed to have 3 capabilities. We've done the first 2 of these, and we have not done the third one yet. And we're actually thinking about how this is actually going to play out. So we do have the visual display of data that's complete, and I'll show you in one second. We have a reporting tool that's complete. And then this trade-off tool, where we essentially wanted to integrate some of what we were doing with an agent-based model to understand potential trade-offs of different types of food policies that has not yet been integrated. So when we were getting started, as I mentioned, we really looked to the Maryland Food Systems Map. As I said, it's been a fantastic example, and we're really, really grateful to Jamie and Caitlin for being so sharing of their time and resources. I also wanted to highlight that we don't just have a single website where you can find our mapping and reporting tool. And this is because even though Colorado State University right now has created the tool and hosts it, it's really meant to be something of our partners and of our state, right? It was this co-created process to put this together. And so there are a number of different places where you can actually go and access the map. And so we've hoped that this has helped to make different stakeholders feel some ownership over it. Also wanted to just highlight that it attracted new stakeholder interest during COVID, because it was really the only place where you could find indicators around the food supply chain, for example, or locations of food supply chain infrastructure in one place. And so we're actually getting calls from the Department of Homeland Security that we're making use of, especially our manufacturing and processing data, because the Colorado Department of Agriculture maintains all of these data, but they don't necessarily release it unless you do a request. And so it would be sort of a longer process. So as I mentioned, we have 2 of these components that are now functional on our map. So one is just mapping, and we're still trying to think about how to make these icons on the left better. But so if you click on that one on the left, you can, excuse me, on that mapping piece, you can see the different mapping elements. And then if you go down further, you can see our reporting tool. And so with that, I'm happy to show more about our map and reporting tool later, but I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Becca. Ohio State, if you would like to share your screen.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Sean with the Knowledge Exchange, and the Knowledge Exchange is a relatively new venture that we've been around for about 2 years, and we were started in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences here at Ohio State. And our purpose is to highlight the research that is going on within the college, and take that out to broader audiences of decision makers and folks like that who find who could benefit from the research that is happening within the college, and also to provide a mechanism of collaboration and cross-pollination of ideas between researchers within the college and researchers from within the college and the rest of the university. And also to provide tools and things that integrate data and bring data together around different campaigns and communities and areas of interest within the college. So we're going to talk today about the food systems map that we created and a little bit of background on this. We originally started on this back in about February of 2021. And the purpose, or sort of the impetus for it, was all of the vulnerabilities that were being brought forth in the food supply chain as a result of COVID. But it also sort of gave us the impetus to think about the food supply chain and how the different research activities here fit into that, and also to give us a avenue of collaboration with like the College of, the different public health researchers and others here at the university, folks looking at other things with food deserts and food access and food security issues, especially surrounding food equality and economic equality and things like that. So the purpose of this map is to kind of introduce the various types of data and things that we pull together to try to answer those questions, and to provide a starting point for researchers to have a place to utilize those data in their own research, and also to create some other types of content and things around the food system that sort of show the boots on the ground aspect of the food system. So we have different entry points and ways to get to the food system. You can go straight to the map from our homepage, from our landing page. You can also use this visualization that kind of pulls together different content that's been developed around the food system. And so if you click on one of these different little icons that show up, you can go straight to the food system map, and that will be highlighted. Those data will be available on the map by default. And if you click on one of these topics at the top, and it gives a little write-up about how these topics are pertinent to the food system. And then you can go to specific content that we have, podcasts, videos, interviews with extension educators and farmers and researchers that are doing this kind of work, and also show some of the related information around the food system. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our GIS specialist, Wajihah, and she's going to walk you through our map. And if you have any questions, we can handle those after we get through the demonstration here.
So when you first enter the food system map, there's a little tour walkthrough that shows you all of the different functionalities and capabilities of the map and the different things that you can do to customize it. So I'm just gonna start showing some of the different things. These are all the different layers that we have. And so users have the ability to turn on and off, whichever layers that they'd like. And going from there, based on what they have selected, they then have the ability to change the order of the layers, which is really helpful for when you're viewing things like choropleth maps or point layers together, being able to kind of put them on top of one another to see the various overlaps. And you can change the opacity, which is helpful for the different choropleth maps, just because some of the colors sometimes don't really show that well on top of each other. And based on how you get your map to look and which layers you have selected, you're also able to export the map as a PDF, which is really cool. And some of the normal functionalities like changing the base map are available too. And then for each layer, when you select it, you get this description. Did you want to talk about this, or I can go through it?
Yes.
Okay, so there's the description, and something that we wanted to add is why is this important to the food system specifically, just because there's sometimes a lot of different layers and people who aren't too familiar won't necessarily know why that's related to the food system or how. So we incorporated little snippets about that, and then showing how often the data is updated, direct links to the data source, and being able to view it in ArcGIS online as well. And then from there, you can save the layer as your own, and you can then download a CSV copy of the layer as well. And then down here, these links then are related content items to each layer that show you to some of the different other things that we have on our website. And then one last thing is at the beginning, we also have a table view of the food system map, where this is for ADA compliance, but also for people who just want to take a look at the raw data. They're able to access that here and download it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And lastly, we'll turn it over to Chautauqua County.
Great. Hello, I'm Linnea Carlson, the chair of the Chautauqua County Food Policy Council, and I'm going to share my screen here. Please let me know if you can't see it. All right. So Chautauqua County is quite a small rural area in New York State. We have a population of around 125,000. For many decades, we were actually #1 in terms of farms and agricultural land in the state. And in the last 5 years, we have moved to #3. So we have quite a few farms that have left the area. We're losing a lot of farmland. People are retiring out of farming, and amongst other things, we have quite a large number of food insecure individuals across our rural landscape. All of this in mind, our community really came together to dissect what we could do to build our food system. And part of that was, let's see, there we go. Part of that was applying for and receiving what was called the Growing Food Connections Initiative. This was back in March of 2015. And our Food Policy Council was a direct result of our participation in this initiative. Growing Food Connections is really a collaboration of different policymakers, researchers, and advocates specifically addressing issues of food access and food insecurity and how they can come together to create more sustainable agricultural systems. And we were lucky to be chosen as one of 8 communities of opportunities across the nation. And this was a 5-year initiative that ended with a report conducted under Dr. Samina Raja at the University of Buffalo's Urban Planning Department. They created for us kind of a roadmap for how we can continue to build upon the work that we were doing under this 5-year initiative to not only create more sustainable policies related to our food system, but create some real boots on the ground change, specifically in terms of educating our community on food systems in general and how they can help participate in building a more sustainable food system. So the first suggestion under that initiative for our county was the hiring of a food system development coordinator. And that is how we got Melissa Keller, who is here with me today, who currently works for our county planning department. And with the hiring of Melissa came the formation of our Food Policy Council, which was officially formed in June of 2019 via resolution under our legislature. And really the last, since then, the last few years, we've been trying to understand exactly what we need to focus on in order to build our food system as a food policy council still in its infancy. And so we've really kind of zoomed in on several different broad sectors, the biggest being economic development, as we are a rural and low income community largely. Agritourism is another, as our county actually grows and exports the most grapes outside of California, which we are very proud of. As well as focusing on different ways that we can connect organizations and individuals and communities under the public health umbrella to address the issues of food insecurity and food access that plague many of our rural municipalities across the county. So as a Food Policy Council, our first big success and initiative was the development of our food system map that I am very excited to turn it over to Melissa so she can give you a little background on the development of the map and how it's utilized.
Thanks so much, Linnea. And I'm just going to see if I can bring up my screen here real quick. Great. Yes, so as Linnea said, our council started about the later half of 2019. For our first few meetings, we discussed some of the recommendations and the data incorporated into the Cultivating Prosperity in Chautauqua County report that was put together by Samina Raja at the University of Buffalo. While we were discussing that report and our mission and our values as a new and established council, we're discussing different programs and assets that we have in our county, and we realized that there was a lot of good things already going on that maybe we weren't quite so aware of. So in the same vein as Linnea said, we wanted to do something as an initial project that would help to facilitate connections, help to educate the public and our public officials, and really identify the assets that we have in our food system. So having those conversations led us to really the development of this map. Which undertook a good chunk of 2020, and I think its importance was revealed through all the inefficiencies during COVID as well. So here I have our map, which is hosted on our county's planning department website. You'll see people first see this landing page, kind of give them a little bit of information on the map itself with some informational links to other facets about the food system and our Food Policy Council. Our map is not so much reliant on other data sets, but is really self-reported. So that's maybe a deviation from some of the other maps that we've seen earlier today. So people can go right to our website, go to this Google form, and input their information, and then we manually upload that to the map.
So the map itself looks like this. We have it's zoomed into our county itself. And again, we wanted to use this as a little bit of a facilitation tool, facilitate connections, networking, educate the public on, maybe where they can go to maybe get local produce, but also educate people on the food system. We realize, we're in this, we talk this language, but people outside of our conversations don't necessarily use the same terminology as we do. So we wanted to incorporate that into our map by outlining how we define the different sectors of the food system and providing a little bit of background information on each of those sectors. From there, people can go over here to this filter tool. Once they understand what we mean by these different sectors, they can go ahead and select that sector and then select whatever we title these as subsectors that they're looking for. So if they're looking for a place to find fruits and berries, they can click that, go to the point on the map, and we just have this informational bubble, if you will, with website, contact information, a brief description, and just some other helpful information. People can also then, if they are so inclined, go to see a list of all of the different entities that are incorporated into this map or the various sectors. So I think, yeah, that's really our map in a nutshell.
Thank you both. I think that we are going to have Becca come back on just for a minute before we get into the discussion.
Hey, everybody. Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just going to show you really fast. I realize that probably it's useful to just see this a little bit more similar to what you just saw with the other maps. And so, this is our map. If you click on it, this is processing and distribution. You can see things like where we have food hubs or where we have custom meat processors. I think maybe the more innovative piece of our map is this reporting tool functionality. And so here what you can do is you can select either the state of Colorado or you can select different counties. And I think what's cool here is that I could select, for example, Baca County and Boulder County. And so I have them both there, and I have the option then to either pull reports on both of these separately or actually to aggregate them into one region, right? And then based on that, you can, once you pick that, you can select the different indicators that you want. So for example, under demographics, you can pull up what you would like here. And then I'll sort of stop just because I know we want to get to Q&As. But what's nice then is that on the back end, when you actually get this report as a sort of PDF, we provide you the information then, comparison of the county you've selected or the region you've selected to the state, as well as to the country where those data are available. And so I think it's a pretty useful thing for stakeholders, especially that are trying to do some benchmarking about where they are relative to others.
Thank you for sharing that. That's helpful. At this point, I am going to ask everybody to turn on their cameras and we will move into the discussion portion. I'm seeing a few questions coming in the Q&A, and I think some of those will be addressed as we go throughout here. And so first, thank you everyone for giving those great introductions. I think there's a number of similarities across these different applications, but also some unique features and ideas that I'm excited to hear more about your experience working with them and developing them. So first, we're going to start off the discussion digging a little bit deeper into the question, why maps? There's a number of different ways to visualize data, and we know maps are just one tool to understand and assess our local food system. We heard a little bit about why you created these, but wanted to dig a little bit deeper. What is it about map visualizations or looking at data spatially that makes these resources so valuable to your audiences and stakeholders? What value add do these maps bring to your work? And I'll just open it up to anyone who'd like to respond first.
I can give a quick answer. So a lot of times I work with economic development agencies or entities, and I think sometimes there's this push to attract new businesses. And especially in our rural communities, that can be really difficult. And I think sometimes we don't have enough focus on thinking about, sort of that endogenous growth, thinking about how can we invest in what we already have or leverage underutilized assets. And so I think having that visual depiction of where we have these assets in our communities is really useful then to thinking about how we help to sort of build up what we have.
I'll jump in and echo that. Really, the visual is just so important when we're having conversations with stakeholders, whether that be, our municipal leaders or even area funders, especially when we're talking about economic development, or in our case, agritourism opportunities, just to have that visual of what we already know we have in our county, and kind of have that spatial awareness of where those assets are located. We are a small county in terms of our population, but we are quite spread out in terms of geography. And so I think that it's really important for the community to have that visual of exactly where different farms or producers or markets are in our area. I think the other big piece of it for us, and why we chose this to be our first kind of major project as a food policy council, was our kind of what we perceive to be a deep lack of understanding of the food system in general. Whether that be in conversations with municipal leaders or stakeholders, or even community members who lead organizations that are in the food system, but don't even realize it, and the role that they play and how that they can connect with other people. And so having something that these groups and individuals can easily access, in order to help them make those connections, whether that be a farmer trying to connect with a wholesale distributor, or even a restaurant connecting with one of our compost organizations, is really valuable. And so I know that was huge for us, and when we're thinking about why a map.
I appreciate that. I think we are similar in that it's not only a great assessment tool to see kind of that bird's eye view of the food system, but then also communicating with folks as well. I think maps can really be this familiar frame of reference for people where they can, locate themselves on the map or an important landmark and be able to really ground the information that they're learning about the food system. So we find it to be a really effective communication tool, as well as internal assessments as well. So I'll move on to the next one, next question here. So we know that maps are valuable. Clearly, we all are map fans and have created these projects, but we do know that maps can't tell us everything. And so like we've said before, they're just one tool. And so wanted to hear from our panelists, from their perspective and the work they've done, what can't maps tell us? What are some of the limitations that maybe you've encountered, or considerations that you might share with people who are interested in creating this type of resource for their community? And perhaps what are some of the ways that you've tried to address those limitations through your work?
Well, for us, it was kind of difficult thinking about which indicators and stuff to include on the map, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going on to use the map that don't have, like GIS backgrounds, and don't necessarily know what layers to add, not add, and overlay to kind of get the information that they're looking for. So we thought that on top of like making this food system map, there could be different tools that go along with it that kind of show areas of vulnerability and food insecurity, and kind of highlighting what's going on in that area and why it is the way that it is. So sometimes it's hard knowing what you need to look at to kind of get the information that you want. So I think having a tool that gives people like an easier ability to do that would be helpful for sure.
Yeah, sort of in line with the previous question, I guess. I think maps are a good starting point from a sort of a exploratory data analysis, standpoint. Why is there this cluster of this here and that kind of thing? Yeah, I think that if you wanted to do really in-depth modeling and things like that, you'd want to, look at other types of things. And sometimes trends are not as easy to show on map, and you want to look at changes over time. You can show that on map in different tools that are out there, where you can, like story maps and things, where you can show how things evolved over time with population, human populations especially. But yeah, sometimes it's nice to be able to just see a trend line real quickly to say, is the value of property increasing, decreasing, holding flat, that kind of thing.
I'll just speak from our experience that a lot of people come to our map application and they say, oh, these are really cool looking maps that you can create with your map application, but we don't necessarily know what to do with the information, once we look at it. And so we often say to people who come to us and say, okay, talk to us about the Maryland Food System map, we say, you often need to add some context to the map to make it really come alive. Sean just mentioned story maps. You can add context through story maps. And I think that Ohio State did a nice job in their pop-ups. When you select a particular layer, you see why is this important? So it adds extra information to people to know, what to do with this cool looking map and the data behind it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're at the front end of working on a national project, which I can talk more about later, but with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we're actually really trying to think about, is a map most what we need, or what communities want access to sort of talk about local and regional food systems work. Maybe a data directory, for example, is more useful, or a storytelling platform. We've been talking about like a data visualization platform. I think American Farmland Trust, for example, has done a much better job than we have in Colorado with some of those data visualizations. And so I think really being clear on sort of the goal of what you're trying to do is important. But going back to the previous question, I think a map is useful for particular things, like I mentioned about economic development, but also, for example, we perennially hear the question around, we don't have enough meat processing facilities. And I think sometimes people don't even recognize what's in their backyard. And so for something like that, a map can be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and agree with that. The context is key. One thing that constantly is in the back of my mind with a community that has a lot of food access issues is, the unfortunate reality that some stakeholders or individuals will look at the map and be like, oh, well, we really don't have a food access problem. Look at all these amazing things that we have in the county. And that's true. We have a lot of amazing assets, but at the end of the day, we do still have communities, particularly communities of color and Native Americans that live in our community that simply don't have food access in the way that they deserve. And so providing those stories and that context is absolutely key.
I appreciate that and totally agree, and think that, kind of leading into this next question, thinking about not only the why we create these maps and how we might share them, but what are some of the details around actually creating them? What are the how questions? How did you get to this point? While we don't have time necessarily for each of you to share, the full story of your development, we really want to hear some of your top tips or lessons learned in developing your application. So I can see that there's a number of questions in our Q&A that are really related to this, and that's the title of our webinar. So we want to spend the bulk of our time here talking about some of these tips around whether it be funding or partnerships, technology used, data collection, data priority, maintenance. First, I think I'll just let everybody kind of give their top tip, and then maybe we'll get into some of the questions that have come through the Q&A.
Well, I'll just, as a part of this national effort that we're going to be starting soon, I think part of the goal would be to have the secondary data in a way that's easily available to anyone who wants to do this. And so that then you would have it available, it would be updated regularly from the huge number of like US Department of Agriculture sources, Farmers Market Coalition, et cetera, and that then it would allow you to focus on sort of the local pieces that you can't get from those secondary data sources. As I mentioned in my presentation, for example, getting the information on all of the permits, for example, that the Colorado Department of Agriculture has, so we know where that manufacturing infrastructure is. You know, that's not available from secondary data sources or from the federal level. And so that's where I would spend time. It's not about building the mapping tool, but it's about sort of thinking about the data piece.
I'd be happy to go next. I would say in the process that we had in our discussions, really think kind of going back to what we just mentioned on limitations, really considering your user and who is your primary audience. Caitlin and Jamie, I think when I first reached out to you guys, that was one of the biggest points that really stuck with me. If you don't know who your user is, why they're going to come to this map in the context, it's going to make it difficult for them to find the information that they're looking for. And I would also say, along with that, being flexible is also, I would say, a good tip. You know, through our process, we brought this to our Food Policy Council, tested it out a number of times, took about a year before we truly released this to the public, and took the time to really make sure that what we were providing was done in an understandable and clear way. So I would say that would be, and Linnea, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, definitely. Like Melissa said, taking the time to test it out. You know, I know we were really excited throughout the last year to just make it live and get it out to the community and fulfill the goals that we had with it. But making sure that it's user friendly, that it has the data information that we want to communicate accurately. I did answer someone's question directly about how we populate the map, but to elaborate on that, you know, it was interesting for us with the way that we populate the map, with it being self-reported for sectors of the food system. I think that it was valuable for us as a smaller community to be able to utilize the networks that our Food Policy Council members had to make those direct asks of individuals that we knew should be on the map, as well as realizing, you know, after the map started to get populated, you know, who is missing from this. But that's always going to pose a challenge when you have something that's self-reported. We were surprised initially about how limited that was in terms of how many people did not respond to the direct asks. And we actually were able to provide incentives, basically proposing to individuals. We provided kind of like a raffle, like if you put your business or your organization or your farm on this map, you know, you're going to get entered to win a $50 gift card, which sounded insane to me at first, but it really helped. And then, you know, circling back with these individuals and communicating to them, you know, why it's important that they participate in this and what the end goal is. And you know, it's something that's so new for our community, is that, you know, the hope is that once we're able to really establish some successes under this, that it won't be so difficult for us to continue to populate the map. But that was a really interesting challenge that we ran into.
Yeah, and I would second both Melissa and Linnea's. Oh, sorry. Oh, I would second their sentiments that if you can get engaged with a community of, you know, real people doing real work early on, you'll be able to much better framework the potential use cases and things like that, and get it, you know, and have them as your stakeholder or focus group to help to develop things around, and then you can let it grow from there. But getting those potential use cases defined early on is something that we're probably, you know, I think will help influence our version 2.0 of our map.
I just wanted to add to that, we explicitly made the decision not to allow people to self-populate, and it may be the difference between having a county do it versus the state. But essentially, we didn't want to make it seem like there were a lot of farms in one place, right? Like we might have Boulder County respond disproportionately to some of our areas out in the Eastern Plains. And so what we've done is we've had to be able to get the data from sort of a defensible source, if that makes sense. Not that an individual wouldn't be defensible, but that it would be equitable across space and across like value chain area and such.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm seeing a few questions related to this primary data collection versus secondary data collection, and how to balance that. Because for the Maryland Food System Map, we kind of, Jamie spoke to this a little bit, but the majority of our data really come from these publicly available data sources. And part of that is because we are a statewide map. And so we want to make sure that we're collecting data across the entire state. So it sounds like, at a smaller scale, like a county, it might be possible to do some of these more boots on the ground truthing data collection efforts. I was wondering if you guys, though, could speak to the data maintenance of that, like what kind of schedule you anticipate having, because with these publicly available data sources, we're kind of bound by what the state or the federal agencies, their update schedule, but you all have done some of this more on the ground data collection. So I was wondering if you could speak to that piece.
Sure, I could speak to that a little bit. So we do have, everything is self-reported, so we do have to have something of a maintenance schedule. I review and see if there's been any new entries, and on almost a bi-weekly basis, try to get those in. So I think also being a county level, it's probably a lot more manageable than if you were doing that on a state level, but that's how we've gone about it.
I'll say that we try and update our map quarterly. That doesn't mean that we update every single data layer on a quarterly basis. It means we try and pick out chunks of data that we can update, and we update those specific data layers. And then we sent out a newsletter via listserv to update people that are subscribed to the listserv, to let them know what data that we've updated. And then I was going to say, I'm going to answer another one of the questions in the chat and sort of piggyback onto this and just say that for us, we have two main people that are attached to this project, but we do get assistance from a student research assistant. So more or less, we have a team of 3 people working on this, and it's usually 2 of those people that are working on data updates. I don't know if some of the other people on the call want to talk about their teams and how many people participate in data updates.
We've been less organized on the data updates. We've tried to leverage students, and it has not been very successful. And frankly, it's not very successful because there are some data that are very straightforward and easy to get, right, where you can just straight up download it. And then there's other data that are very useful to communities that actually require some manipulation before they can be used. And that's a much more complicated process. And so that's sort of why I've been saying that, within a year, and frankly, I hope much before that, our team, so now we have somebody who's going to be putting together these secondary data sources via, I think, in an SQL format, and so that those would all be available to all of you to save some resources. I think that what we're trying to understand is, that census of agriculture data only come up every 5 years, right? And so we know when that is in regular intervals. There's other information on, SNAP participation rates, for example, that's annual. Things like the farm to school census, we don't know how often that's going to happen. And so we try to think about those different, I think what Jamie said makes a lot of sense. But our hope is to basically have somebody on our staff whose job it is in those regular intervals to go and to update that information, but they're far from being a full-time employee. I mean, I could see that maybe they're going to spend 5 to 10% of their time on the data updates.
Ohio State, maybe you guys could speak to your team on your map application project.
So yeah, we kind of had the same issue. We have some things that we know how often they're updated, other things we don't. We just one day noticed that there's a new data set available or a new map available. So it's kind of the same thing. We're trying to put into place a update frequency when we can go out and look or sense when things have been updated. Other things, it's, we know that the Census Bureau gets updated every year, roughly. Not based on this last census, of course, but and so yeah, we try to we're trying to put processes in place for updating those things now. As far as resources and manpower to do that, we'll probably just handle that on our own, with the existing staff that we have. But we're trying to put processes in place to automate some of these things as well, or to make it a little more, or at least we have everything happening all in one place, and using data integration tools and things like that. So yeah, but it's definitely something that we've been thinking about throughout the process, is how we're going to keep all these things updated and keep them relevant.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing I'll just mention as I kind of transition here for us that we've realized is a consideration is how to evaluate the use of our application and project. Thinking about what kind of feedback loops we could incorporate. We've had this application up and running for almost 10 years, and these types of resources that exist, you never know who's going to come and stumble across it. People from all over the country might find it, and to know who's using it and how they're using it can sometimes be a challenge, but something that should really be considered and built in as you're thinking about maybe creating a resource like this. We've done some surveys and some listening sessions with folks. We look at analytics, but I think there's more that could be done in that space, and kind of leads me into the next kind of question I have is around some examples of use of your applications. So we've kind of talked about the back end, some of the technical details, and would love to hear a little bit more about the front end. So people that have come to your application and used it, if you could share a little bit about some concrete examples and maybe how you gather those examples and evaluate the impact of your application.
I can kick it off. It's a really good point, Caitlin. I mean, obviously we struggle with that. We have taken a look at different ways to evaluate how people are using this. We send out notices to our listserv to say, please send us examples of how you've used it. We'd love to incorporate that into some document that we can share with other people. Just this past spring, we actually held two we called map chats to talk with people who've been using the Maryland Food System map to gauge like how often they use it, and to get ideas for like what they might like to see in the future. I think that the main uses that we saw from that map chat, where people were taking the information, whether it be tabular format or map format, and incorporating that data into their reports or into proposals. People were just sort of getting a lay of the landscape in Maryland to see what the food system looks like. That was often more of, say, than a classroom experience. Trying to think of other examples. I don't know, Caitlin, do you remember maybe one more example from what people told us?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, was doing this kind of, one of the reasons we use maps is more that bird's eye view assessment. So getting that landscape analysis, I think, was one of the primary reasons to kind of do that exploration and understanding of what's going on in their community.
I just wanted to add one quick thing. This is something we think about a lot, which is that, having a map is great and having the data available is great, but we worry that sometimes it can be misused. And so, we have been trying to think about how to provide training opportunities along with the map. And I answered this question, but it's one of the reasons we haven't maybe promoted the map as broadly because of COVID. We just haven't had the opportunities to do the training that we anticipated with communities, and so thinking about that, right, like the differences between correlation and causation, right, those are really, really critical. And so I encourage folks to try to think about that. Of course, it requires more resources, but it's really important.
Yeah, and we've only been live with our map for less than a month. We went live with it on September 1st. So, but we have gotten, we put the ability up there for people to provide feedback and ask them for like, what, can you tell us what data that's not here that you would like to see here? And, can you tell us how you might like to be able to use things? And we have gotten some feedback from the researchers here who, asked us, well, I'd like to be able to just grab a quick, to create a map and, grab a quick PDF or image that I can just email to someone else and say, hey, look at this. And then, the other feedback we got there was to provide API endpoints to our data so that they can pull it into R or SAS or Stata or something like that and do some further analysis on it. And so that's something we're also evaluating. But our integrations team has also started to think about having a training session for folks to show them how to use the map and how to utilize it. So we're hoping that using a combination of these things and also looking at site analytics and things like that, that we can get a better handle on how people might be currently using our map, but also might find additional things we can do to create additional use cases and things like that, or to at least answer those.
There's a specific question in the question and answer about working with emergency operations centers to use these maps. I know, Becca, you mentioned that earlier on in your conversation. I was wondering if you could talk maybe more specifically about how they maybe contacted you or how they use your data.
Yeah, I think, especially towards the beginning of COVID, there was this recognition of sort of wanting to understand more of the pinch points along the supply chain, the food supply chain. And I think for some, for like the Department of Homeland Security, they maybe hadn't thought about that as much as all of a sudden they recognized they need to. And so what they were trying to do was to quickly essentially map out, where they were not looking for local farms, right? And they were not looking for farmers markets. They were looking for larger scale infrastructure. But where did we have that larger scale infrastructure so that they could sort of quickly identify that and then think about doing some assessment? And so that's how they reached out. And I think part of that too, Jamie, is just as I'm seeing I'm trying to answer a bunch of the questions that are coming up, is to really think innovatively about data. There is a lot more data that's publicly available than we think about. As part of a USDA Ag Marketing Service project, I went and trained with a number of colleagues, thousands of people across the country on sort of how you evaluate the economic impacts of your local food system work. And I think one of the main takeaways for me out there was just how much data people don't realize how much we have. And so we can try to put some more links to some of the places where we've been compiling this information. Obviously, you can look on our maps, but there's more than that that's out there. And so I do encourage folks to think about trying to find a lot of that information, because I think for a lot of our different stakeholders, just having that one-stop shop is a really useful thing.
I'll say that we've worked with local governments, and they contacted us at the start of the pandemic, and we'd worked with them on multiple projects, mapping, sharing data, and they came to us and said, we just need more up-to-date information. Is there any way we could get more up-to-date information? And a lot of those publicly available data sets, they're updated, as Becca had said earlier, every 5 years, every 1 year. Sometimes it's every couple of years. And so that's something that's really a big issue with this data, the data we're working with, related to emergency operations. Time is very critical.
I'll just jump in and say overall, when COVID first hit, we didn't have our map, and we really didn't have any way of disseminating information to organizations and stakeholders about anything in our food sector. And it was kind of we had a lot of meetings with local funders and our local food pantries and churches, and everyone was just, it was chaos for everyone, but there was nowhere for us to send anyone to say, hey, here's the food pantries in the community, here's the the soup kitchens, here's the wholesalers, who could maybe pivot because they're no longer supplying the schools. And so I know that I'm proud that we were able to do the work to create this map, and the hope is that God forbid we do encounter more crisis situations, that we're a little bit more prepared than we were, and yeah, so we're thrilled to have something now that we can direct people to.
Absolutely. And I think COVID really opened a lot of people's eyes to how this kind of a resource can be really useful for for a number of different audiences and impacts. One other question in the chat that I don't think we touched on is the different platforms that everybody uses. I don't know if we could just take 1 minute for each of you to explain or describe what platform you use for your map application.
Okay, 1 minute or less. We are using ArcGIS Online and AWS cloud services and Drupal backend, and some other data integration tools, AWS Glue, AWS Data Brew, and things like that for our data cleaning, transformation, ETL processes. And
The map itself was built using the ArcGIS for
JavaScript.
developer, JavaScript.
Yeah, so we're using the JavaScript library to create that, and we house that within an Angular project.
We use something similar to AWS Cloud to host our data and to create services. And we use ArcGIS Online to pull in those services and populate our data portal.
We use something that has been largely custom built and internal to Colorado State University. We worked with some folks in our engineering department and college who basically built a bunch of the backend pieces for USDA, but more on the biophysical side. However, we are going to take it and actually move it somewhere else and probably recreate everything soon. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the approach that we've taken to date.
Ours is almost in a similar vein, Becca. We had a planning technician who was well-versed in coding. So maybe going back to tips and lessons learned, always make sure that you have the capacity to maybe change or the knowledge. Luckily, before he left, he showed me how to update everything, but I would not be able to make the edits that he was able to make. I do know that he did use a tool called Mapbox, and it's also hosted on GitHub. So that's where we're at.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so we just have a few minutes left here, and so we wanted to close with one last question in terms of what do you see as the future of food systems mapping? So whether your project specifically, excuse me, or just generally in the field of GIS and food systems, what do you see as the future?
Well, I think one area is to better hone in on those tipping points or vulnerabilities, and to be able to highlight those better. Where are the hotspots without doing too much interpretation that might be able to get you into questionable or dubious results. But kind of taking it to the next level and showing very plainly, here are policies that are making this red area even redder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm constantly, as a food access advocate, constantly thinking about how we can better make our community at large aware of the gaps in the food system and food access. And this is more specifically for our map in particular, but I would really like to have highlighted kind of those areas that are affected by food apartheid very plainly and very specifically, in an effort to continue to draw attention to issues of food insecurity. And I like the idea of highlighting some of the policy issues as well, because there are a lot of policy concerns in more rural areas. We're seeing zoning codes that haven't been updated for hundreds of years that are really a hindrance to expansion of our food system, urban farming being one of them. And so, yeah, I just think, again, going back to our earlier conversation about adding that context to a map, whatever that might look like.
And I'm not at all an expert in data visualization, so I'm not going to speak to that piece, although I agree with the Ohio State comment. But I think that we have an opportunity right now, and this is one of the things we're hoping to do through this new USDA Ag Marketing Service project, is really to bring together data from across these different food system sectors, right? Because we have the Farmers Market Coalition and we have the Farm to School Network. And so we have all of these different groups, or Wallace Center doing work with food hubs, and we don't necessarily bring it together to think about, how these groups really, like how having a farmer's market impacts the viability of a food hub, or right, what the relationships are. And I think if we do a really good job in putting these data together, part of which would be in a mapping platform, but part of it may look different, that actually we can do a lot more than from the research side too, right? And doing more of the sophisticated analysis that we aren't going to be able to do through the mapping, but could be part of the stories that we then are able to integrate into the map.
And I'll just add too, from I think some things that we've learned and things that we've thought about is this idea of there's a kind of a developing field around community geography. And so using kind of more of a participatory approach in creating and collecting and sharing data and sharing the narrative, that I think is a really neat way to kind of consider some of the next steps for some food systems mapping work. I'm seeing a few more questions here that I was hoping that we could maybe quickly answer since we have another minute or two. And this is kind of around the same idea in terms of like who you're partnering with or who you're gathering data from. I'm seeing one question around federally recognized tribes and whether or not you've partnered or given or gotten food source information from them, as well as other nonprofit, potentially, I see that question as well, nonprofits in your area, aside from just federal or state databases.
Yeah, I mean, the nonprofit partners, Nourish Colorado is a key partner in what we do. They've been really big on something called mapping the movement that they've wanted to have integrated. And so they've really been helpful in helping in thinking about where we have double up food buck location sites, for example, or where we have retailers that accept SNAP and WIC. And then we're helping us to navigate the different state departments and agencies that also can help us get that type of information. So yeah, that's been critical. But again, we think about how to get those data in more of a systematic way. So we get the full list of data. We don't do additional surveys, partially just to make our own lives easier. But
Maybe I'll just add a little bit to that. Our nonprofit partners have been instrumental in getting the word out about the map. With it being self-reported, we really rely on getting the word out. And luckily, we have a lot of those partners sitting already on our Food Policy Council. So it just speaks to the importance of having that network, even if it's in its infancy. We have our local extension that sits on our council, so they were truly very helpful. And again, Linnea spoke a little bit about the incentivization of our entries. That was spearheaded by another partner, Chautauqua County Health Network, who was able to provide that. So truly, we couldn't have done this without our partners.
And I'll just add that we've had some of our best experiences working with nonprofits around Maryland. Not only, are we allowed to dig deeper into the data with them, they provide some of the data that we're not able to get access to, but then they're able to take that information, whether it be a map or a data or a summary of some kind, and then take it up to decision makers who will then, potentially influence policy.
Well, we are at time, and I just want to thank our speakers for taking the time to present today and share about their experiences. I hope that you all have found this to be useful, and if there are additional questions that we didn't get to, or you have other questions, I'm sure we'd be happy to follow up and have some additional conversations. We'll make sure that this recording is available, and we appreciate you taking the time to spend the afternoon with us.